Hey, third grade art friends, it's Mrs. Herbay. Today we are going to begin to do the next part of our project where we are going to watercolor our bird and any of the branch or the thing that our bird is sitting on that is in the foreground of our picture today. Okay, so what you're going to need is your watercolor paper with your bird on it. You're going to need a little cup of water. You're going to need your paintbrush and your watercolors, okay? And if you're using a reference photo for your bird, if you want to either be looking at your computer screen or laptop screen or have a printed out picture of your bird, that's great too. So if you want to go gather those supplies, and then we'll get started. All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to be talking about watercolors and how to put down, we're going to put sort of down a base layer of color first, and then once that's dry, then we'll add some more color to it. So what you want to do is you want to look at the picture of your bird, and if I look at my tufted titmouse, I see here one of the colors is this sort of light blue color. So I'm going to look on my watercolor palette, and I'm able to find, I have a blue here that kind of matches. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually wet my brush in some water. And then I have a little part here on the tray of my watercolor. If you don't have this, if you want to get like a little plastic lid or something from your parents' kitchen that you can use, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to wet this blue, but then I'm going to put some of it right here on the tray. And so what that does is that allows me to kind of get some of the color onto my brush, but not a whole lot of it. And unlike when we painted the background of our bird, when we got it wet first and we wanted the colors to kind of blend together, when we're doing our bird, we don't necessarily want the bird to be wet. We just want our brush to be wet. And what I want to do is I just want to put a little bit of light blue down, not a lot. So what I'm doing is in the areas where I see the light blue, I'm just go ahead and painting with my brush. And if you notice, I only have a tiny little bit of paint on my brush. So I'm just going ahead and kind of painting where I see this blue color. And then once I see that my brush is getting a little bit dry, I'm going to go back to where I have a little bit of that paint. And then my brush is a little bit dry, so I'm just going to dip it into the water, and then I'm just going to rub it around on the paint again a little bit. And that way it's just giving me a nice light color. Again, I'm just going to dip a little bit in the water and then a little bit onto, and I'm getting a really, really light blue. If I want to get a little bit more blue, I'm going to paint in a little bit more of the blue color. And again, you don't have to paint it exactly like, it just kind of gives you the idea. And then I'm going to go back and kind of smooth this a little bit. So there, I got a base layer of the blue down. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse my brush, and then I'm going to dry it off. And then I have a little bit of orange, the same thing. So I'm going to, over here, I'm going to wet my orange and then paint a little bit right here. And then what that's going to allow me to do is to add some orange right in this part of my bird. And then the last color that I see on my bird is some of this, it's sort of like a gray color. So what I'm going to do is I rinsed my brush and I dried it, and then I'm just going to dip it a little bit in the water and a little bit in the black. And then down here, I'm going to kind of paint some of that. So I just have a little bit of the, and then you can see here, I'm painting a little bit of the gray that I see kind of on my bird. And if I just take a little bit of that, notice how it's nice and light. I'm just going to wet my brush just a tiny little bit. It's almost like a ballerina. And she's just dipping her tiptoe into there. And then you'll notice the eye is a little bit darker. So I'm going to actually take my brush and I dipped it right into the black, and see how you can see how I got this nice black color. And I'm going to go ahead and paint the eye there like that. And then I noticed that the beak is also sort of a dark black, so I'm going to kind of outline that. And then there's a little part above that is a little bit black too. So I'm going to kind of paint that. Right there. All right, so I kind of have some of the basic colors of my bird blocked in, and then I'm going to also turn my attention to the branch, and I'm going to rinse my brush off. And the branch looks like it has some grays and browns, so I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to wet it, I'm going to get it, swirl it around in the brown, and I'm going to come over here, and then I'm going to mix some of my brown and some of my black just even right on here, and then see how I was able to get a little bit of a darker, and then I'm going to actually mix a little more black in there, and then see how I'm able to get like a darker brown color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to brush that onto the branch where I see that. And then if my brush gets dry, I'm just going to dip it in the water a little bit, but I didn't put any more paint on it. And then as I sort of spread that out, it gets a little bit lighter. And there's like a little bit of a shadow there, so I'm not going to put some paint right there. So this time, you notice we're not using a lot of water and not too much paint yet. So I'm just going to kind of fill that branch in. And then up here, it's a little bit darker, so I'm going to take some of my black again and kind of mix it down here. And it even looks like maybe there's a little bit of blue in that black, so I'm going to mix it a little bit like that. And then for this part of the branch, and maybe I want a little bit of brown too. And then see how it gets a little bit lighter. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rinse my brush off and kind of dry it off. And then I'm going to use that paint and kind of spread it and kind of paint it. And you'll notice then that gets it a little bit lighter. And then up here it's a little bit darker, so I'm going to get some more paint on my brush. And then up here, there's a little bit more of this brownish gray. And then a little around the top. Okay, So that's the basic bottom layer where I got everything done. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, and I can feel now that this is dry because I wasn't using a lot of water. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to darken things up a little bit. So I'm going to look at my bird and I see it's a little bit darker blue along the edge here. So what I can do is I can take my, I have my blue here, but I'm going to put a little bit more blue down on the palette. And I'm also going to just grab a tiny little bit of black here to make it a little bit darker blue. And then once I like that darker blue, then I can kind of paint that sort of along here where I see that darker blue. And I can also see like some darker lines of it here too. So I'm going to paint that like that. And it looks like up here, there's also a little bit of darker blue. And then I'm noticing my brush is getting dry, so I'm just going to dip it in the water just a tiny little bit and kind of touch it on there. And then I'm looking for a couple other dark areas where I might want to add a little more dark. And if I want to smooth it out, if I just dip my brush in just a little bit of water, and then I can kind of blend that all together like that. All right. I can do the same thing where I want to put a little bit more darker gray. I rinsed my brush, and then I'm painting kind of where the, oops, and see that made a kind of a blackish darker line than I wanted, so I added a little bit of water to it. And then I kind of spread it out. So then that's getting me a little bit of darker gray. And you can use your brush to kind of make the sort of the strokes, like to give you sort of like the feather texture. Just filling in here. It's a little bit darker there. And I can also do the same thing for the orange. After I finish up this gray, I'm just going to kind of blend that up a little bit. Okay, and then I'm going to rinse, and then I'm going to pick up, I'm going to add a little bit of water, and I'm going to pick up a little bit more of my orange again, but this time I have a little bit more orange on the brush, so it's making it a little bit darker on this part up in here. All right, and then I need to look at the feet. The feet have, they're kind of gray too. I'm going to go ahead and use my gray. And fill in that. All right. And then I can go back and do the same thing for my branch. So I'm just going to rinse my brush. Just kind of, I like to have a paper towel because sometimes if my brush feels wet, I can just kind of lightly dry it off a little bit. And I'm going to pull, again, some of this darker brown. And then I'm able to paint a little bit darker brown along here, along the edge of this branch. And if I run out, I'll just dip my brush in the water, kind of come over to my brown, and you can see that's kind of a light brown, so I'm going to pick up a little bit of my black. Maybe I'm going to dip my brush a little bit in the water, just a little bit, and then just pick just a dab in the black. And it's like, whoa, that's really black. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just rinse my brush, kind of dry it off. I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the brown and kind of blend it, and there we go. And then I have my dark brown again, so I'm going to fill in along there. And then if I want to kind of blend it, I'm going to rinse and then dry off my brush. So it's kind of, and then I'm just going to kind of blend that in there a little bit. Just taking a little bit of that dark paint. All right, and then I can do the same thing to this little branch over here where I can take, I have some gray and brown, where it's a little more gray. And give it a little more texture. And if I need a little more black, I'm just gonna dip it in the black, and then I might have to rinse my brush off, dry it off, and then kind of spread this black around so it's a little more gray. All right, and maybe just a little darker around there. Okay, and then I'll let that dry. And then what we can do, last but not least, is I'm going to go back to my little feet, and they're going to be the last little things that I kind of darken up a little bit with my dark gray, so you can kind of see them. All right, and there we kind of have the basics of a bird. If you want to, then if you would like, if you wanted to add any more details, what we can do too is, let's say you have some colored pencils. What we can do is, like, once this is dry, what we can do is, like, I noticed there's some sort of lines in here, and it might be a little easier for me to draw those lines with my colored pencil. And same thing, I could take, I have a little bit of my brown or my black, and I can add a little more texture, feather texture, if I want to, with my colored pencil. And if I want to kind of outline where my And you could do the same thing with your other. And I'm just going to put a little bit of white right there. And there you have it. There is my bird. So I look forward to seeing what you guys do this week. If you have any questions, come to our meet where we can talk and ask questions. Also, if you want to go back and even darken this even more, you can. You just get the idea of where you just do a little bit and you add the color and then let it dry and then a little bit. And some tips are you don't want to have your brush too wet and you want to mix your paint kind of off on this little side palette and it will help you kind of blend it. So have fun with this. It's your first time watercoloring, so don't get too frustrated. I just want you to enjoy it. All right, talk to you soon.